In Hollywood, image is everything, but behind the bright lights and flawless smiles, there is a different story unfolding, one that insiders are only beginning to speak about in hushed tones, and at the center of it stands Blake, lively a figure whose public charm and elegance have long made her a favorite of audiences and the media. Yet those who have worked close to her tell of a power that moves quietly, a reach that extends far beyond red carpets and film sets. They describe a network of influence that can shift careers, change narratives, and silence dissent without a single public confrontation. This is not about dramatic showdowns or headline-making feuds. It is about the invisible weight that comes with crossing someone who knows exactly how to shape the game to her advantage. Whispers travel fast in this town. Stories of phone calls made to producers of journalists suddenly backing away from stories of colleagues who vanish from the spotlight without explanation. And while nothing is ever directly traced back to her, the patterns are hard to ignore. Those who have experienced it firsthand call it retaliation, though it comes not with shouting or threats, but with the slow erosion of opportunity and access, a kind of quiet pressure that leaves no proof, but changes everything as new developments in her ongoing legal battles bring her name back into the spotlight. The tension is building. Insiders are watching to see whether this moment will challenge her dominance or reinforce it. And as one industry veteran put it recently, we are not afraid of what she says. We are afraid of what she can do without ever saying a word. Hollywood is a place where image is everything, where perception can make or break careers, and where the most powerful moves are often made far from the spotlight. And in this world, Blake Lively has built a reputation for being more than just an actress. She has crafted an empire of influence, carefully managing her relationships, her projects, and her public persona to the point where she seems untouchable. But as the layers are peeled back by those who dare to speak, a different picture is emerging, one that suggests her reign in this industry is maintained not only by talent or charm, but by a network of behind-the-scenes strategies designed to keep her at the very top. People who have worked with her describe a constant undercurrent of control, as if every decision, every interaction is weighed not just for its immediate benefit, but for how it might affect her long-term positioning in Hollywood. If a co-star begins to receive too much attention, there are quiet interventions. If a stylist chooses to work with someone she sees as competition, that stylist might find their phone calls unanswered the next time they need a favor from her team. It is a kind of strategic dominance that is rarely discussed openly, because to even acknowledge it is to risk being targeted by it. And those who have spoken out in small ways have often found themselves facing professional setbacks that seem to arrive out of nowhere. The most unnerving part for many is that this influence does not have to be loud or aggressive. It works in silence, in whispered conversations over cocktails at private events, and untraceable messages passed between gatekeepers who know exactly how to interpret the smallest signals: a single raised eyebrow at a meeting, a short comment about someone's work ethic, a subtle suggestion that a certain person might not be the right fit for a project. These are the tools of quiet power, and they are far more effective than public feuds because they leave no obvious trail. As her ongoing legal entanglements with high-profile figures escalate, the reach of her behind-the-scenes network has become a central topic of conversation among those in the know. Industry veterans note that her ability to control narratives is not new. It has simply become more apparent now because the stakes are higher, the conversations more intense, and the scrutiny more constant. Insiders describe meetings where publicists discuss how to handle potential stories involving her not from a place of neutrality, but from a position of caution, sometimes outright fear. Certain journalists have admitted off the record that they have had to water down or completely shelve stories about her after receiving calls from powerful intermediaries. And while on the surface, these moves may appear to be standard PR management, the sheer consistency with which such incidents occur paints a different picture. It suggests a sustained effort to manage not just her own image, but the perception of anyone connected to her or in conflict with her. This is why the phrase, "we are terrified of her retaliation," has begun circulating among certain circles. It is not that people expect a dramatic confrontation or an obvious scandal. Instead, it is the slow, quiet erosion of opportunities, the unexplained drop-in calls, the invitations, that never arrive. These are the consequences that those who have crossed her or even unintentionally offended her describe. The entertainment industry thrives on access, relationships, and momentum. Losing even one of those can be devastating, and When all three vanish without explanation, the effect can be career-ending. The fear is amplified by the fact that she is rarely, if ever, linked directly to these outcomes. Everything is handled indirectly through friends of friends, through whispered instructions, through the kind of deniable communication that leaves everyone guessing, but no one able to prove anything. And this makes the situation even more insidious, because it cannot be easily challenged or exposed. And so the cycle continues. Her allies remain loyal, not just because they admire her, but because they know the cost of falling out of favor. Her detractors stay silent because they have seen what happens to those who speak, and the rest of the industry watches from the sidelines, unsure whether to admire the efficiency of her control or to fear the possibility that they too could one day be on the wrong side of her influence. As more details about her current legal battles come to light, the question many are now asking is whether this moment will mark the beginning of a shift, whether the carefully maintained structures of her influence will begin to crack under the weight of scrutiny, or whether she will once again emerge unscathed, stronger, and more untouchable than before. What is certain is that every move she makes now is being watched, analyzed, and dissected by those who understand the stakes, and by those who have learned the hard way that in Hollywood, survival often depends not on talent alone, but on navigating the invisible lines of power drawn by people like her. The nature of influence in Hollywood is complex, and for someone like Blake Lively, it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. On one hand, she has a public image meticulously polished through interviews, charity work, and high-profile appearances. On the other hand, there is the less visible network of relationships and obligations that extend deep into the industry, a network that can be activated quietly but effectively when the situation demands it. This dual approach makes her power far more resilient than the fame of many of her peers, because it is not dependent on a single role or a wave of public goodwill. It is rooted in connections built over years, each one carefully maintained, and each one potentially useful when she needs. To protect her position, insiders say that she has an uncanny ability to remember every detail about the people in her orbit, who they are connected to, what they value, what they fear, and how they can be persuaded to align with her goals. This attention to detail is not just about politeness or charm. It is strategic. It allows her to know exactly which strings to pull and when. In moments of conflict, she is not the kind of person to make a public spectacle. Instead, she works through intermediaries, allies who can deliver messages without ever mentioning her name. If a producer is considering a project with someone she has decided is not in her interest, that project might face unexpected delays if a journalist begins investigating a story that could cast her in a negative light. That journalist might suddenly find themselves invited to exclusive events, offered other stories, or distracted by new opportunities that conveniently pull them away from their original investigation. The effect of this is cumulative over time. People in the industry learn to avoid crossing her without anyone ever telling them directly to do so. They simply observe what happens to others and adjust their own choices accordingly. There are countless stories told in private about actors who once seemed on the verge of major breakthroughs, only to see their momentum vanish after a disagreement with her or those close to her. There are also accounts of directors and writers who have been subtly pressured to recast roles, rewrite scripts, or even abandon projects altogether, all without any official explanation. The mechanism is always the same, a sequence of small obstacles that individually seem insignificant, but together create an insurmountable barrier. Those who have tried to confront the situation directly have found it nearly impossible to gather tangible proof, because the people carrying out these actions are often motivated by loyalty, fear, or both. They act in ways that can be plausibly denied, making it look as if the outcomes are simply the result of bad luck or shifting market trends. And in Hollywood, where careers rise and fall for countless reasons, it is easy to hide behind that uncertainty. This is why the current wave of attention surrounding her is so unusual. It is rare for the patterns to be discussed openly, let alone connected to one individual. But the combination of her legal battles and the mounting number of insiders willing to talk even in vague terms has created a moment of vulnerability for her. At the same time, this increased scrutiny may only push her to tighten her control further. Industry veterans note that when people in her position feel threatened, they often double down, reinforcing their alliances and making strategic moves to neutralize potential threats. Before they can cause real damage for some, This means quietly distancing themselves from those who are now speaking out for others. It means actively participating in efforts to discredit these sources, casting them as unreliable, jealous, or motivated by personal grudges. And while such tactics may sound ruthless, they are not unusual in an environment where reputation is currency and survival often depends on undermining rivals before they undermine you. For those watching from the outside, this may seem like an elaborate conspiracy, but for those who live and work in Hollywood, it is simply part of the game, a game that she has mastered to an extraordinary degree. Her ability to balance the public image of a charming, approachable star with the private persona of a calculating strategist is what makes her so formidable. And it is also what fuels the fear that so many now admit to feeling, because even if she is not directly involved in every decision or action taken in her favor, the perception that she could be is enough to make people think twice about crossing her. And perception in this industry often matters more than reality, as the legal disputes and public controversies surrounding Blake lively continue to unfold. The conversations happening behind the scenes in Hollywood are growing more intense. This is not just gossip, it is the kind of whispered analysis that industry veterans engage in when they sense that a shift in power may be coming. And while some see this as a possible moment of reckoning, others view it as a dangerous time when retaliation could reach new heights. The phrase, "we are terrified of." Her retaliation is no longer limited to a handful of voices. It is slowly spreading into more circles as individuals realize that the risks of speaking out are real and not just exaggerated stories shared in private. Many of these fears stem from the pattern of indirect consequences that follow those who have dared to challenge her. These are not explosive confrontations that can be documented in a single viral moment. They are gradual erosions of opportunity that unfold over months, sometimes years. A casting call that seemed like a sure thing quietly goes to someone else. A magazine feature disappears without explanation. A collaborator stops returning calls when these incidents are viewed in isolation. They seem unrelated, but when pieced together, they form a pattern that is hard to ignore. What makes this situation more complex is that she rarely, if ever, acts alone. There are layers of people in place to carry out certain tasks, whether they are motivated by loyalty, fear, or simply self-interest. These individuals are part of an ecosystem that functions to protect her image and maintain her position. And because each action is so small, so seemingly insignificant, there is never a single moment that can be pointed to as proof. Instead, it is the accumulation of these small acts that creates a very real sense of vulnerability among those who find themselves on the wrong side of her influence. The entertainment industry thrives on perception, and once a person is seen as unreliable, difficult, or risky to work with, it can be nearly impossible to recover from that reputation, especially if those perceptions are subtly reinforced over time through casual comments or secondhand stories. Insiders say that one of her strengths is her ability to understand how these perceptions take root and how to influence them without appearing to be involved. It could be as simple as a comment dropped into a conversation at the right time with the right person, a small seed planted that eventually grows into a narrative that serves her interests. This is why so many are careful about what they say and who they say it to. Because in Hollywood, information moves quickly, and it is not always clear who might be listening, or who might carry that information back to her inner circle. The fear is not just about losing a single job or opportunity. It is about being quietly pushed to the margins of an industry that is built on relationships. Once that happens, it is incredibly difficult to reverse. And those who have experienced it firsthand often describe it as a slow suffocation, where the world you once had access to begins to shrink day by day, while those around you pretend not to notice. There is also the financial element to consider. Hollywood careers can be short and unpredictable, and losing momentum even for a year can have lasting consequences. Projects fall through, contracts are not renewed, and the income that once seemed secure begins to vanish in this context. The fear of retaliation is not abstract. It is tied directly to survival and stability. And for those with families to support or reputations to protect, the stakes are even higher. It is not surprising then that some choose to remain silent, even when they have witnessed or experienced things they believe should be exposed. For many, the calculation is simple. Speaking out could bring momentary satisfaction, but at the cost of long-term stability and security in the eyes of some that is too high a price to pay as the public watches the legal battles play out. The question is whether this atmosphere of fear will finally break, or whether it will become even more entrenched. Some believe that the scrutiny might weaken her position, forcing her to rely less on quiet influence and more on direct public engagement. Others believe the opposite, that she will use every resource at her disposal to ensure that her position remains untouched regardless of how the headlines unfold. And for now, that uncertainty only fuels the tension, because no one knows exactly what will happen next. The deeper you go into the inner workings of Hollywood, the clearer it becomes that success in this world is rarely determined by talent alone. It is a game of alliances, strategy, and timing, and those who manage to stay at the top for long periods do so because they understand how to control the variables that others overlook. Blake Lively has long been seen as someone who understands this game better than most, and the ongoing stories from insiders paint a picture of a figure who is always thinking several moves ahead. Her influence does not depend on a constant show of force. Instead, it thrives on subtlety and patience. The ability to let a situation unfold naturally until the right moment to intervene presents itself. This kind of influence is much harder to counter because it leaves no clear target to push back against. For example, when someone in the industry finds themselves suddenly excluded from events or conversations, they cannot point to a single obvious incident that caused it. They only know that somewhere along the line, their name stopped being included, and opportunities began to dry up. And when this coincides with a known disagreement or falling out with her, the connection becomes hard to ignore. One of the reasons this influence is so effective is because it is reinforced by the larger culture of Hollywood, a culture where everyone is constantly aware of who holds power and how fragile their own positions can be. It does not take much for a person to decide that avoiding a potential conflict is better than taking a risk, even if that risk might lead to something good. This constant self-censorship creates an environment where the most powerful voices are rarely challenged, because challenging them is seen as both dangerous and ultimately futile. Some insiders describe this as a form of soft control, where the fear of what could happen is often more powerful than any actual retaliation in this environment. Rumors gain weight quickly, and reputations can shift overnight, especially when influential figures are involved. And because she has built a brand on being relatable and charming in public, the contrast between that image and the stories told in private only adds to the mystique and uncertainty around her. Those who have worked closely with her often speak of an uncanny ability to read a room, to know when to be warm and inclusive and when to be distant or dismissive in ways that send a clear message without ever being overt. This level of social intelligence is part of what makes her so effective at maintaining control over her environment. It allows her to keep allies close and potential threats at bay without ever appearing to do so directly. As her legal battles continue, the industry is watching not just to see how the cases will play out, but to measure how her influence shifts in response. Will her network close ranks around her, reinforcing her position, or will cracks begin to show as people sense an opportunity to step out from under her shadow? At the moment, it seems that both possibilities are unfolding simultaneously, with some allies doubling their public support, while others quietly distance themselves, waiting to see where things land. This uncertainty creates its own kind of tension, because it forces everyone in her orbit to make choices about loyalty and self-preservation, choices that could have lasting consequences depending on how the situation develops. And for those who have long lived with the quiet fear of retaliation, the hope is that this moment might open space for change. But in Hollywood, change is rarely simple, and power rarely shifts without resistance, as the dust settles around the latest wave of headlines. The question of Blake Lively's true influence remains unanswered to the public. She is still the familiar face from films and fashion campaigns, the image of grace and control, but to those within the walls of Hollywood boardrooms and private gatherings, she represents something more complex and far more difficult to define. She is a reminder of how power in this industry rarely operates in the open, how it flows quietly through networks of loyalty and caution, how it shapes decisions without the need for commands or threats. The phrase "we are terrified of her retaliation" will continue to echo in these spaces because it speaks to a truth that many have felt but few have dared to name. And while the legal battles may reveal documents, testimonies, and public statements, they may never fully capture the subtler forces that have allowed her to hold her position for so long. Perhaps the most telling sign of her enduring influence is that even now, as questions mount and speculation grows, many still hesitate before speaking her name in anything less than flattering terms. They weigh the risks, consider the consequences, and more often than not choose silence in a place where careers can be built or broken with a single conversation. This silence speaks volumes, whether her reign continues unchallenged or whether this moment marks the beginning of a shift. Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: the industry will not soon forget the lessons learned. In these months, lessons about power, about perception, and about the invisible lines that define who survives and who fades away in the unforgiving landscape of Hollywood.